Welcome to the next episode of Real Stories Leadership Series, the Canadian real estate industry. I'm your host, Micheline Bentley from Matrix360, and we're excited to collaborate with Informa Canada. We're delivering a platform for leaders to share their experiences today. The intent of our dialogue series is to engage with business leaders as they share their insights and wisdom. Before we commence, a little tidbit about us, Matrix360. We're an advisory platform that bridges the human experience with business innovation. It is with great privilege and responsibility that we partner and advocate for people in the industry. Today we're here at the Land and Development Real Estate Forum in Toronto, Ontario, and we are honored to be joined by Monika Jaroszonek, CEO and co-founder of RATIO.CITY. Welcome, Monika, and thank you for joining us today. To kick off the conversation, can you tell us a little bit about yourself in your role right now and what your company is all about and a little bit of how you got to where you are?
Sure. So right now, again, I'm the co-founder and CEO at RATIO.CITY. I've always been fascinated by cities. So even as a kid, I loved visiting cities. I loved seeing how cities grow. I loved the vitality of cities. And so that was always a preoccupation. And so I knew that when I grew up, I was going to become an architect. Mm-hmm. And so I went through architecture school, and then I spent the last 15 years practicing as an architect in Toronto, building mid and high-rise buildings. And so I've worked on millions of square feet of different projects, mixed-use projects throughout the city, and it's always been a very, very exciting time to be a young designer in a city like Toronto that's been growing so rapidly. But when I took a few steps back, I sort of realized that there were, if we looked at Toronto, we had to keep growing. We've got lots of people who want to live and work here. There's just not enough space. And so how else, other than actually designing buildings and picking out brick colors and drawing window details, how else could I help build that city that I want to live in? And so that was kind of the main motivator to create RATIO.CITY. And so what we're doing is we are looking at the city and trying to organize it using technology. And so because we've got a limited amount of space and a lot of people who want to live and work here, it's kind of like a math problem. And so what we're doing is we're letting you actually search the city, find opportunities where there's space to build, where the city regulations say that they want additional density. So Jennifer earlier alluded to, the avenues, and there is lots of opportunity within the city, but it's hard to find. And so we've created tools to help you find it. And then using my architecture background, once you've got a site that you're interested in, before you call your architect, before you call your urban planner, you can really quickly test options and alternatives. And so it's a quick tool to understand, again, the existing built form of the city, what the city envisions, and then to run options and alternatives to figure out whether it meets, as a real estate developer, your pro formas, your requirements.
Okay.
So it's a series of tools.
So a smarter way of looking at existing real estate and how you can capitalize on it a bit better.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So with that journey, and given the fact that you started as an architect and now you're the CEO of your own company, a startup in an industry that is, starting to embrace technology, describe for us a moment that you experienced in your career that has really made a positive impact for you.
Interesting. A specific moment. I think it's once you've got a few years of experience, there's certain stories that you tell yourself. You're like, okay, I'm good at this. This is something that I'm very, very familiar with. This is something that I'm good at. And the flip side of that is, well, I'm not good at other things. And so again, as an architect, I was busy all the time, right? There was always projects, there was always deadlines, there was always something to do. And so I was really busy just meeting all these deadlines and getting all this work done. And, according in my books, well, I wasn't good at sales. Oh, I wasn't good at public speaking, because I was just too busy just getting work done.
Right.
But for me then to, take a risk, leave that comfort space, figure out that, okay, you know what, maybe this isn't what I'm best at right now, but I can learn new skills. And for me, again, in hindsight, it sounds silly, but I'm like, okay, I still can learn new tricks even after, a decade and a half in the industry. So for me, that really sunk in. And so being able to, go out into public and engage with lots of people who I might not have crossed paths with in my previous role has been really, really interesting.
So that moment would have been when you decided to shift into Ratio City and kind of make a change?
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, it's a risk to leave a industry or a role that you're very familiar with and that you know inside out, and then to leave that all behind and try something completely, well, okay, not completely different, but pretty different, is a risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a very conservative person.
And so now that Ratio City as a startup has been around for about a year.
Just under a year, exactly.
Is there any sort of memorable, impactful lesson that you've kind of learned throughout your journey, coming from, let's say, what you described as a stable, I'm an architect, I know what this means in the layout of the land, and now I'm an entrepreneur?
Again, I think Toronto's been a very exciting place to be in the tech industry. So the analogy I keep giving is, as exciting as real estate development was 10, 15 years ago in Toronto, that's kind of how exciting tech is right now in Toronto. There's a lot of excitement. Everyone sort of sees the opportunity. There's a lot of outside money kind of coming in. There's a lot of government opportunity, government grants and programs that really encourage the industry and specifically women in tech. Because again, there is a diversity issue in the technology fields. And so for me, recognizing that there were all these programs out there that would help make that transition. So whether it's, the Mars building down at college and university that has a series of programs, so anybody who's looking to get into the tech space, they've got great programming, great resources. The DMZ at Ryerson, also great programming, great resources. And so knowing that, okay, I didn't have to do this alone, that there were, there was a support network, there's a very strong community that, again, once you start networking with, you realize there are a lot of people in the space, everyone's really supportive, wants to help and wants to see the industry as a whole succeed, which has been, I think, a great learning experience for me.
So the memorable lesson would be kind of connecting the dots and seeing that you're not alone and that there's an opportunity for this.
That it's not as wacky as the first time we talked to my co-founder and I talked about this idea. I was like, that's a crazy idea. The more we researched, the more I looked into it. I was like, okay, it's not that crazy. It's a little bit crazy, but it's not that crazy.
If you could go back and mentor your 20-year-old self, knowing what you know now, given what you just said, what would you say some critical pieces of advice would be to that 20-year-old?
I've thought about this one a lot, actually. I think the biggest piece of advice would be get outside the building. That again, it's a very busy industry. There's so much going on. It's easy to just stay focused on the project that you're looking at, your next deadline, just, being good at what you do. I mean, you still have to be good at what you do, but you really have to also keep your eye on larger trends, get out, do lots of networking and maintain your personal connections, because regardless of what the company that you're with or your position, that's all going to change. But your personal network will move with you. And so the importance of networking, and again, personally, nobody ever taught me how to network. I didn't realize it was a thing. And I went to a session about 6 months ago and somebody taught me how to network. I was like, I had no idea.
I should come prepared.
Yes, I wish I had. I wish somebody had told me this 20 years ago.
What do you think that takeaway would be in terms of like how to network from what you've learned?
Well, I guess it's the realization that everyone who comes to these events is out to network the same way that you are. So you're not inconveniencing anyone by approaching them. They're actually there for exactly the same reason. I'm like, for some reason, I've never thought of it that way. And so the opportunity then to expand your scope and talk to new people, is fascinating.
And that kind of allows you to be more present in the context of your role and your position rather than just what you do.
And then when you go back to your role, you understand how you fit within the larger picture. And again, you understand how you can bring value to somebody else and somebody who you might not cross paths with on a daily basis, but is also, in the industry as well.
So let's talk a little bit about, like, as a woman going through architecture and now being a CEO of your own company. What do you think the largest misconception is about your career that people have had about you?
Again, I don't think that there are any. I'm not sure whether I've been lucky or what, but I've never been exposed to explicit bias, and I think what the issue is that like in any industry, you've got to prove yourself. And so you've got to prove that you know what you're talking about. And I think that's true of anybody who's coming into a new industry. Sorry, I got to pause there. I'm just trying to think of other misconceptions. I think the bigger issue is in consulting, because it is customer driven, client driven, and deadline driven, consulting is very difficult. And so it is hard to maintain live-work balance. And so I think for me, that was very difficult. Again, it's one thing when you're right out of university and it's a badge of honor to be working those hours and putting in the time. But at a certain point, you do need to be really strategic about your time, make sure you're being as efficient as you can, just so that you can leave to deal with other parts of your life. And so for me, I think that was a very a tricky part, especially as I got older in the industry. So now, again, with my own company, again, I'm trying to make sure that we're building a culture within our own company that supports people who have, outside interests, that have lives beyond, what they're working on, and can have, a diverse background.
Okay. To that. And even as an entrepreneur, you wouldn't say there was any misconception about kind of like your journey, and that you had to, that now in retrospect, you're like, I'd like to shed light on that.
Not that I can think of offhand. So.
Okay. I'm going to share a little bit of information about some facts that are out there, just as a point of interest. Some interesting insights. 82% of the Canadian population live in large and medium-sized cities across the country, one of the highest concentrations among the G7 nations. According to the 2016 Matrix Canadian Real Estate and Diversity Workplace Survey, in Ontario, over 52% of the population in urban centres are female, while less than 34% of women are in leadership positions. In Ontario, between 35 and 54% of the working population in urban centres identify as visible minorities. So that would be visibly from a racial perspective, ethnic groups, and yet less than 25% of them are in leadership positions. So just an interesting kind of piece of information about the environment that we're in and living with. Could you share with us what you are doing in the industry in your current, onslaught with RATIO.CITY to acknowledge some of these factors within the Canadian workforce?
So, I mean, yes, Canada is a very urban, highly urbanized country, and that's sort of one of the reasons that we started the company. In terms of the visibility of women in leadership roles, I think it's become a major part of the public discussion in the past year, 2 years. And I'm glad to see it, because I think that's the first step. And even for myself, I thought it was very interesting, because I am participating in a lot of these sort of women in tech groups, and to be exposed to more and more female CEOs, because again, it was something that had never occurred to me as I was growing up, because again, I didn't have that image. And so I think getting more women to speak out, again, because most of them are so busy, getting work done, meeting those deadlines, but getting them to be in visible positions where, whether it's younger women, kids can see them as an idea of this is what a businesswoman looks like, this is what a CEO looks like, this is what a tech founder looks like. Again, I'm not a 20-year-old guy wearing a gray hoodie, And honestly, and I've met some really amazing women who have started tech companies based on a need that they saw, that they had the expertise to fulfill. And so it's fascinating, because they ran the gamut from, 20-year-olds who were still finishing university to 50, 60-year-olds who had been in an industry for such a long time, but saw that they had a solution that nobody else had thought of, and knew that they could be the ones to bring it in. But again, when we see images in the media, we see the 20-year-old guy who never sleeps, is living on caffeine, and never sees the light of day. The rest of us do have families, we do have lives, and we can do it all.
You made a really interesting comment earlier about how coming to this conference, that not only tech is noticing that there is a huge gap between women being involved in the industry, but you notice in real estate as well. Reflecting on your career, are there any factors that you've noticed that affect employees in the workplace as you see it today?
So it was interesting, because when I attended university, I think our class was one of the first that had gender parity in university days. So I'm not going to say how long ago that was, but we were equal. And it's interesting, because when I graduated, all of a sudden I walked into my first job, and I'm like, oh, okay, so that's not this way in the office. Okay, but we just have to wait until all of us kind of grow up. But I think, again, because the office cultures and that work-life balance is very difficult to manage in the consultancy world, that it just turns a lot of people off. That it's so until again, more women are in leadership roles, recognize that this is very limiting, that again, women do have a lot to contribute, and they can manage and they can multitask, but you know what? They might have to leave work a little bit earlier. Or, maybe they need a bit more flexibility in the summer, but you know what? In the winter, they can make up for it. And so I think that there is, again, until the office culture is fundamentally changed to allow more flexibility,
to be more inclusive,
and to understand that not everyone is motivated by the same things. That again, a supportive culture, being appreciated and understood, being actually listened to, yes, and to fitting in is just as important, if not more so, than your salary expectations.
Yeah.
And actually, teaching women how to negotiate more effectively is also, I think, critical to understand that, we don't want to undervalue ourselves, but we need to understand then what the going rate is. We need an objective measuring stick, because if you're just operating in a black hole, you don't know what's reasonable,
so
what's not.
Parameters
we need parameters, and again, now that's becoming all part of the discussion, which I'm very glad to see.
So as a leader, how do you feel that you've adapted to the changing demographics in communities to foster inclusive workplace? Obviously, now you're still at the early stages, but I know you made a comment, or you were quoted saying, real estate is ripe for disruption. And obviously that's in the context of what you do. What are you doing to engage communities, or even within your own company, when you feel like the right people maybe aren't at the table, or aren't coming to the table in order to make that happen?
Again, right now we're focusing on making a tool for industry professionals, but again, none of us operate in a vacuum, and so a large part of the real estate process is the the regulatory body. So talking to the city, talking to the planners, talking to the urban designers, and talking to the general public. I mean, there is I think an education component that will need to be considered to educate people about how our cities are growing, what that means for them. And just because you happen to have a backyard that backs onto the Danforth doesn't mean that you have a guaranteed right to 12 hours of sunlight, because you know what, we need to put more people there. So I think there's a public outreach component, and I can sort of imagine that our platform down the road would help people visualize things in a very intuitive way, because it's hard to explain what drawings and site plans are to the general public, but somebody looks at something in 3D in the same way that you would a video game or interact with it, you can kind of understand what the implications are for your neighborhood. But also then to explain what the process is, I think is going to
the people that are actually going to be impacted versus the people that are So to reiterate, the Real Stories Leadership Program is positioned to showcase the insight and wisdom of real estate leaders. What footprints would you like to leave as your legacy in the business community?
Okay, I think I need a few minutes to think about that one. Footprints and legacy. I think it comes back to what I said at the beginning, this fascination with city building, and cities are constantly growing and evolving. And if we think about cities that we think of right now as beautiful, so everyone, Paris is lovely, but Paris is consistently 6 to 8 stories tall. It's actually hyper dense. The number of people per square kilometer in Paris is actually 2 or 3 times that of New York City, and nobody realizes that because it is, again, it's the way it's planned. But when the medieval city was bulldozed in order to build the Paris that we now know and love, the public was up in arms and they hated it. Oh, it's very monotonous, it's boring. And so in the same way that, the public outreach right now, nobody likes change. And so what I hope my legacy is that, when we look back 100 or 200 years, on the city of Toronto, that yes, this was a, 2 or 3 decades of vast change, but in that process, we were able to build a dynamic, livable, dense city that will take us forward for the next, 100 or 200 years. So that's, I think, ultimately what I hope my legacy is. And it may not be actual bricks and mortar anymore, but it will be,
how
again,
people have
thought about the city and how it's grown.
So to conclude our conversation today, if you were to use one word, what would you use to capture the essence of who you see yourself as a leader today? I know it's a hard question.
I can't have two words.
If you could think of one word, what would it be? And you can elaborate if you need to.
I think ultimately creative.
Okay.
And I think there are different ways to think of artists are creative. I think architects are very, very creative. But ultimately, it comes down to seeing larger patterns and being able to recognize them and translate them into something new. And so I think that this idea of creativity and city building is one that I'm particularly resonates with me. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Monika, to have such an engaging conversation and learn a little bit more about Ratio City. On behalf of Matrix360 and Informa Canada, we appreciate the time taken to share this perspective and experiences with us today. If you'd like to learn more about Matrix360 or Informa Canada, please check us out on our website. Thank you.
Thank you.